Hello. I wanted to deeply explore the nuclear apocalypse scenario as part of a bunch of different apocalypse scenarios to get a better understanding of what some plausible situations might look like for lore building, but also to satisfy my own curiosity and to get me thinking on how I could plan for such events. First, let's set the stage, unpack things a little before I get things rolling. To start, I based a lot of my opinions on research I did on the nuclear reactor meltdown in Chernobyl, as well as the nuclear strike on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These real-world events, while tragic, gave me a lot of insight on how nuclear fallout and nuclear contamination work and how long they can have damaging effects on the environment. I was very surprised to see that a lot of sources said that nuclear fallout from atomic bombs will decay to safe levels after just several months. After learning about the 7-10 rule, it started to seem less crazy. The 7-10 rule goes as follows. And mind you, this is supposed to be just a general rule of thumb. But for every 7-fold increase in time, there is a 10-fold decrease in radiation. So after 7 hours, the radiation rate is only 10% of the original, and after 49 hours, it is 1%. I had to double check this information because it does seem unbelievable even after reading it several times during the writing of this video. But the nuclear products of a nuclear bomb decay exponentially. So we could continue on to say that after about 2 weeks, the radiation will be 0.1%, and then 3.5 months later, it will be 0.01%. 24.5 months later, it will be 0.001%. In total, it will take about 29 months for the fallout to go from 100% radioactivity to 0.001% radioactivity. So if you want to shelter out for 2 whole years, that's not entirely unreasonable, but you will be able to go outside after about 4 months and be reasonably safe from fallout. Now, outside of the powerful capacity of modern-day nuclear weapons, with a blast yield of about 5 times greater than that of the bombs used in Japan, it seems the bigger existential threat is all of the soot and particulate getting kicked up high into the atmosphere and blocking out the sun. Now, I've seen nuclear winter described as potentially lasting hundreds of years to potentially not happening at all, even under the worst-case scenario of a full global exchange. The greatest challenge to the nuclear winter theory is the fact that America and Russia's nuclear arsenals have decreased from a maximum of 31,255 weapons for the US and an even 46,000 warheads for Russia to just 3,708 and 5,580 respectively. The second issue is that the theory runs on a lot of assumptions, like that the nuclear fireballs will set nearby forests on fire. The reason why this is important is because forest fires will release a lot of heat and push all the resulting soot from the fires high into the atmosphere, where it will linger for an extended period of time. Reading from one model, which I just personally think is a more realistic version that I found on the Britannica website, a belt of smoke and soot would wrap around the northern hemisphere between the 30 degree and 60 degree latitudes. This will block out the sun for several weeks, and surface temperatures will plunge for a few weeks, as much as 20 to 40 degrees. The semi-darkness, frost, and sub-freezing temperatures, plus high doses of radiation from the fallout, will interrupt plant photosynthesis and could destroy most of Earth's vegetation and animal life. This would lead to a mass starvation, which adds to the death toll caused by the lack of infrastructure, injury, and disease already happening. Also, from what I've read, the nuclear war happening during the summer is pretty critical to the nuclear winter theory. And all of the soot will mostly concentrate in the northern hemisphere because of the large number of nuclear-capable countries existing in that hemisphere. So it seems like nuclear winter is on pretty shaky ground, but purely as a matter of opinion, as an armchair analyst, I think large soot clouds would cause mass-scale darkness from fires that are caused in the areas surrounding nuclear bases. These soot clouds would probably drop temperatures globally directly after in a year without a summer-type scenario. That's in reference to the summer that wasn't of 1816 following the Tambora eruption in 1815. The eruption did place a cloud of soot the size of Australia into the air and caused massive crop failures in the United States and Europe. The global average temperature dropped about 2 to 7 degrees Fahrenheit, and this led to mass starvation globally. So if I appreciate the potential amount of soot that could be caused in a full nuclear exchange, I do think it's very possible for the climate to destabilize for 1 year. The small number of bombs and the theory being on shaky ground from the get-go does give me a feeling that I'm being pretty generous with the nuclear winter idea. And referencing the model that I saw in the Britannica.com website, I will infer that nuclear winter won't last more than 1 year, since in that model surface temperatures would plunge for just a few weeks, After the dust settles out of the atmosphere, things can start to return to normal. Now, I'm not a meteorologist or an expert in any subject really, so I don't know how the planet's weather patterns will react to several months of freezing conditions. But provided that nuclear winter just results in 1 year of abnormal weather, plant life could return to normal pretty rapidly. It seems plants are actually quite hardy when it comes to radiation. Plant life can return as late as 3 years, but in areas where the fallout is minimal, whatever plant life that can survive a frost will probably return right away. People who are able to shelter for 4 months might not even see nuclear winter, but they will see the fresh results of a nuclear winter that has ran its course. Now with that all covered, I'm ready to put on my chef's hat and cook up a scenario that I think is plausible. I'm willing to go ahead and paint a different scenario that goes a little differently from the conventional idea of a nuclear war. It's very possible that a nuclear apocalypse doesn't play out in a matter of hours, but rather builds over many months. It could start with a nuclear tit-for-tat between two smaller countries, where the targets aren't civilian populations, but rather military bases or energy infrastructure. At this point in the timeline, we're still a few months away from a huge nuclear conflict, but to the people experiencing it as it happens, nuclear war will feel the most inevitable, causing people to stock up on supplies and start making plans for what to do should the bombs start to drop that night. But the days would go on. With the use of tactical nuclear weapons being normalized, a superpower could try to flex their might using nuclear weapons to intimidate a smaller country. While the two original countries engage in small nuclear exchanges, they escalate from hitting military targets and energy infrastructure to now attacking human population centers. The rise in tensions has led countries to form alliances in preparation to a potential outbreak of a larger nuclear conflict. With nuclear weapons being used by an additional country, the nuclear fever will return, and people will talk about a potential global nuclear exchange like it could happen at any minute. Undoubtedly, people will be cautioned to be prepared for what to do in the event of a nuclear war. It certainly will be taken the most seriously by now, with more countries joining the small list that have been struck by nuclear warheads. Meanwhile, the superpower that was using atomic weapons as an intimidation tactic adds another small country to its list of targets. Finally, an aggressive first strike is launched against that superpower country to take out their nuclear capabilities. That country then obviously initiates a return exchange, followed by their allies. This kicks off the big event, where multiple countries start to exchange large amounts of nuclear missiles with one another. This is where our likely scenario is also set to begin. People hunkering in their shelters, many people having the wisdom to prepare for this potential event. Most likely, the initial bombs do not strike human population centers, but do strike military bases capable of launching subsequent nuclear attacks. At a minimum, people have half an hour to get to shelter before any fallout begins to hit the ground. The large nuclear exchange will happen across many waves, however. As more superpowers now join the game of tit-for-tat, we see large amounts of fallout being kicked into the air as military sites around the country are struck in the first wave. Then in the second wave, targets will include large human population centers, along with more military sites. By now, the main large event is 1 hour in, with 2 exchanges so far. Unfortunately, like I said earlier, within an hour, another round of bombs will fall. Anyone not adequately sheltered deep inside a building or underground might not survive the pressure wave, and anyone caught in the fireball is obviously gone, even if they found shelter in a basement. In the outskirts of the blast, buildings are still hit with a destructive pressure wave, and power will most likely be lost. Casualties are extreme regardless of precautions, and the numbers will only rise in subsequent attacks on cities that are still left standing. The launches continue as submarines armed with nuclear weapons on both sides surface and begin to launch their weapons. There will also be stealth bombers in the air carrying nuclear bombs. The targets of these subsequent bombs will most likely be military targets once again. Large population centers could have been evacuated, making them less strategic targets, or countries could have reached an agreement to stop bombing population centers. Now, a couple of hours after the bombing, the clock starts ticking. You can use the 710 rule as a general guide to assess the risk of leaving your shelter. At 2 weeks, it could be safe to get to an evacuation center if you can get radio broadcasts explaining where they are located. If you have enough supplies to last you 4 months, then it would be a good idea to stay put. Anything less, and you'll have to consider moving to a new location with more resources, or risk scavenging the wasteland. 4 months have passed now. Major cities are leveled, but many rural areas remain mostly unaffected. Anyone sheltering for at least 4 months will not be in danger of nuclear fallout, but they still have to deal with contaminated water and potentially contaminated wildlife if they encounter any at all. After 4 months, it will be safe to move around if necessary. So the nuclear freeze is something that is still a big barrier to plant life. But it all depends on a couple of major factors. 1, whether or not it happens in the summer, and 2, if there are enough forest fires and burning structures to produce enough heat to push all that soot into the stratosphere. This could mean that countries that weren't at all involved in the war could still be exposed to life-threatening temperatures for a couple of weeks to a couple of months. These temperatures will almost certainly result in crop failures globally for that year. If a nuclear winter or nuclear freeze doesn't happen, then plant life might actually survive a nuclear war pretty well. And there will most likely be parts of the southern hemisphere that barely receive any radiation. Countries that were not struck are surviving off provisions and potentially scavenging food from places that were effectively lost to the war. From what I read in an article about the Chernobyl accident, plant life was recovering within 3 years of the disaster. This gives us a glimpse into how long it could take until plant life could start to recolonize after the nuclear fallout causes temperatures to drop. But within 3 years, the world will be recolonizable by plants and any remaining fauna. The superpower governments will be fast at work rebuilding what they can take back from the destruction, while unfortunately continuing to try and destroy each other with a last-ditch effort to see who will come out on top. And it seems like the plant life animals that do survive will be able to retake the Earth that used to be humanity's most dangerous military sites and our largest cities. Thank you so much to everyone who watched my video. This project went a little off the rails thanks to poor planning on my part, so the following videos I make are probably going to be a lot simpler. I have a few more subjects that I want to explore, like surviving a zombie plague, or exploring possible alien invasion scenarios. All of my videos are going to be more focused on creating grounded scenarios that you can use for lore building, for your own stories, or just as a fun thought experiment. Anyways, thank you for your time once again.